Welcome to Medical Marijuana and Wellness. Tonight's webinar is actually the conclusion of our series talking about how to get a medical marijuana card and what to expect. And what we've done is we've taken all of the questions, frequently asked questions that came up during the series, put them into this particular webinar to refresh everybody as to what subjects we covered, as well as opening the door for you to be able to ask questions. And that's what we're here for, is to help just get your questions answered this quarter. And we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing next quarter. Joining me tonight is a very familiar face, Manny Alfinez. Manny, how are you doing?
Doing very well, Mark. As always, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be here and help educate some people.
I love your shirt.
Oh yeah, the Grateful Veterans. Let me show you.
Yeah,
So
great
great
organization.
entity.
Yeah, we did the webinar with them last week, and I love the shirt. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
I'm excited to actually wear it out and about, see what kind of heads turn.
So we're going to jump into. We have a series of questions that have come up. So I do want to point out that over the last quarter, we went through the whole process of how to get a medical marijuana card, getting started, navigating medical marijuana, the methods of consumption, how to do an individual treatment, edibles, relief, and of course, more importantly, and a very important one, cannabis for veterans and also first responders. What I want to do now is I want to talk about what we're going to discuss over the next, in this particular webinar. And I think the first question that we're going to go through, and by the way, the format we're going to follow is at the top, you'll see a black question, and then we're going to answer that one. So, Manny, one of the questions we get is, how do I get a medical marijuana card in Florida? Can you give me a quick update on how to do that?
Yeah, it's actually not as complicated as most would think. The first thing you want to do is see a physician, see if you have a qualifying condition. And even if you don't have one of the listed qualifying conditions, you can actually qualify because you have similar and or like symptoms of one of those qualifying conditions. So for example, real quick, PTSD is a qualifying condition. However, if you don't have PTS or PTSD and you suffer from stress, anxiety, depression, those are symptoms of, and therefore you can qualify. From there, you set up a quick appointment with a physician, a qualifying physician. You could call around, or you could go straight to MMTC, Medical Marijuana Treatment Center, in your local area. They will qualify you. There is a pretense where you can actually take a survey to see if you pre-qualify, but there really isn't a reason why anybody should not qualify unless it has something to do with age. Then once you're done with the physician, you would actually get assistance, usually from the physician's office, on to apply through the state registry in order to get your medical marijuana license. The difference is the physician provides the recommendation to do so. Once you have the recommendation, which is instant, then you can actually apply online through the state to get the license. Once you're approved, if you're a Florida resident, it should be immediately or within minutes. If you're a seasonal resident, it could take up to 10 business days, but you could use your driver's license or your state ID in order to shop while you're waiting for your medical license in the mail. And then
Sure.
every 7 months or 210 days, you have to renew your recommendation with the physician. And every year, you have to renew your license with the state. Total cost can average somewhere between $200 to $300 plus or minus, depending on the fees and what the state's going to charge you, which is a flat rate of $75. That's right. So the difference between a recommendation and a prescription is a recommendation is not going to be as specific to what to take, when to take it, how long to take it, and so forth, which is what a prescription does. And then with the prescription, you actually go through the pharmacy, it's covered by insurance. Medical marijuana or the Florida program does not allow insurance because it's still classified as federally illegal.
Right. That's kind of important. But it's important to understand you'll get a recommendation. And a lot of our webinars put together to really help you understand what products you should be using and what route of administration. So let's take a look at some other questions that have come up. I know one of the questions is we talk about making sure you have a safe, tested medical marijuana product. And we know it's that way because each of the products here in Florida that are sold through the state licensed dispensaries have to have what they call a certificate of analysis, a COA. Manny, what's a COA?
It's a great question. And as you stated, every dispensary is supposed to have or should have a certificate of analysis for every batch of product that they have, not necessarily each specific item. So if you're making Theragels, for instance, as product A displays, that batch of Theragels will have one certificate of analysis to show pesticides, heavy metals, mycotoxins, but also your THC, CBD content, your other cannabinoid content, such as CBG, CBD NVDA and so forth, and then your terpenes as well. This is basically the recipe that makes up that product, which will also dictate how that product's going to make you feel or affect
Sure.
you to alleviate you of your symptoms.
So I think it's really important to really check these, because one of the things that it does give you is the terpene profile of each of the products, which is critical for understanding if that product's going to address your particular condition or not.
Absolutely. And you could ask this, and it should be provided upon request, whether it's printed out or dictated to you from the person selling you the product. I know a lot of dispensaries are trying to get those certificates of analysis available online while you're shopping for your product. But
Sure.
since it is a live product, it continuously changes. It is very, very, very daunting logistically.
So let's see. So we've now covered this one. One of the other questions that we get constantly is the real difference between medical cannabis and really other products that are out there, whether they're pharma products or whatever, is something called the endocannabinoid system, which every mammal, every human being has. So a lot of people ask me the question, what is this endocannabinoid system? Why is it so important?
It's another great question. So just like other symptoms, our central nervous system, our digestive system, the endocannabinoid system actually kind of regulates everything, particularly the nervous system. And there's certain receptors that we know of, such as the CB1 and CB2 receptors. We're not going to go into the GRIP55 or the TPRV receptors just yet. That's a little bit too deep. But basically what happens is CBD and THC reacts with our CB1 and CB2 receptors accordingly, and that's what gives us that effect. The beauty is that our body, from its internal medicine cabinet, naturally produces endocannabinoids, meaning from within, such as 2-AG, which is similar to CBD, and anandamide, which is similar to THC. And because you're basically supplementing those naturally to the body, there's not very many side effects or long-lasting side effects, withdrawals, or addictions to marijuana at all. Therefore, it is very therapeutic, and it actually helps people alleviate the symptoms. It's not going to be necessarily a cure-all. It doesn't take away everything. It alleviates those symptoms. If you were to stop using this product, just like anything else that reacts with our body, those symptoms will come back more than likely. However, it could take some time, or your body may have adapted to produce those endocannabinoids more naturally because of the supplementation.
And what's amazing to me is how cannabis as a plant produces these endocannabinoids, those phytocannabinoids, excuse me, which are plant-based cannabinoids that it identically mimic the endocannabinoids our body produces, meaning what it's doing is it's really charging our battery or giving our battery basically the energy it needs and the substances it needs to be able to keep us healthy and put us into a state of what we call homeostasis, which is a state of balance.
Absolutely. And to show just how complex that can be, it's not just looking for the high THC or high CBD, which is your cannabinoid content. You also want to look at the terpenes and flavonoids. Personally, for me, the terpenes kind of dictate the effect. It's basically looking at a recipe. If you were to go to a restaurant for spaghetti and meatballs, you have white sauce, red sauce, you have different additives that you would put on there. And because of that, your template or your taste buds are going to change accordingly. I may not like the dish that you may like, Mark. However, I particularly want that specific recipe. And that's how it reacts with the body. So that's why we want to protect or particularly pay attention to the total aspect of it, not just the THC or CBD content.
That's a good point. That's a good point. One of the keys to the endocannabinoid system is the terpenes, because the terpenes are what provide the medical value to your particular body. Now, think of the receptors in your body as each having different shapes, like a Lego set. They each have different shapes. Think of the cannabinoids as being a Lego that fits onto that particular receptor, and it has different shapes. So we have different cannabinoids to attack and to work on the different shapes. And when it does attach, what it deposits inside the receptor is the terpenes and the flavonoids, which is the medical value. But tell me a little bit about terpenes, Manny.
Absolutely. So everybody who kind of researches terpenes is usually going to find some type of chart with a whole bunch of dots or with some type of flow type to it. And that's a great thing. However, a lot of people like to concentrate on a particular terpene for a particular symptom. It can help that way. However, you want to look at the total recipe of it. So for instance, if you're looking at pinene on your chart there, it helps with relieving stress and anxiety. However, if you mix pinene with limonene, it can actually induce anxiety or stress, even
Right.
though they both separately will help alleviate those symptoms.
Right.
So you want to pay attention to these terpenes because, again, that's what kind of drives the bus, whether it's going to be very uplifting, very relaxing and subtle, very in the couch lock type effect where you want to go to sleep, or something that you can balance out midday that kind of gives
Mhm.
both body and mind effect. And
Right.
all that is going to be dictated by the small percentage, usually somewhere between 2 to 8% of terpenes that are in your product.
Yeah, that's really great. That's a good idea. Let's dig down on this a little bit further. Really, what we're talking about is the cannabinoids, flavonoids, and terpenes really working together. That one and one is five, not three. And I think that's the important part about this is the flavonoids and the terpenes working with the cannabinoids actually turbocharge or supercharge the medical marijuana product.
Absolutely. There's a couple of metaphors that I could use for this, but basically what we're looking for is that synergistic effect. One
Hmm.
of those metaphors is you can either have a spoonful of sugar, or you could take that spoon of sugar and make a cupcake. Which would you
Hmm.
prefer? Same metaphor that I like to use is spaghetti and meatballs. If you look at your pasta as your THC, your meatballs as your CBD by themselves, yeah, they'll sustain you, they'll keep you alive. It won't be the most horrible dish you eat, but when you add that red sauce or white sauce, and then you add on your condiments, then you actually have a better dish, and that's the
Right.
synergistic entourage effect that we're looking for when we're dealing with cannabis.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. Does Delta 8 THC come from hemp? And what's the difference between Delta 9 and Delta 8? Really, Delta 8 and Delta 9 are in both marijuana and also in hemp, since they're the same, basically the same plant, just different genus. That's all just different configurations of that. But Delta 8 just doesn't have the same configuration you can see here as Delta 9. But tell me a little bit about this because a lot of people feel that if you use Delta 8, it replaces Delta 9, and that's really not the case because Delta 8's not really as strong and only has about half of the psychoactive capability. So really, using cannabis is a much better deal if you're looking at quote getting high. And candidly, those two products working together really work well to address pain.
You're absolutely right. These are one of my favorite subjects because of everything that's on the market, not just Delta 8, but you have the Delta 10, HHC,
Mm-hmm.
HHO, all these synthetic, if you will, type of cannabinoids. And
Right,
if you look at your certificate of analysis, 9 times out of 10, you'll see Delta 8 in there, but in a very minute percentage.
right.
Whereas over the counter Delta 8 products, or you're looking at 90 to 80, or excuse me, 80 to 90% of content of Delta 8. It is typically hemp derived. It comes typically from CBD, the synthetic
Mm-hmm.
version of it. The curious part, I want to be very cautious on words here. The curious part is how it's manufactured and what is
Right,
left in the end product.
right.
Typically, to get Delta 8 out of CBD, it has to go through some very volatile chemical compositions. I'm not a chemist, I'm not a physician, so I can't really speak too in detail about it. However, the residual chemicals that may be left in the product, particularly if you're inhaling it, can be quite dangerous to you, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. So be very cautious. I've heard a lot of complaints about after headaches, migraines, nauseousness, stuff like that, which you can also get from using medical marijuana. But the effect of that feeling is going to be a little bit different and less intrusive if you're using Delta 9 compared to Delta 8, in my experience.
Right. I think I understand reasons why people want Delta 8. They think it's easy over the counter high, but be very careful. And a lot of the Delta 8, as you mentioned, is synthetic. It's not real stuff. I would stick with natural products as much as you possibly can, both because of the after effect and also because of the effect that you want to get. You want to do something healthy for your body. I should point out that at the bottom of each of these slides is a little yellow band, and it actually is a bit.ly link to a webinar and to more information about this particular subject. So if you are interested in in finding out more information about this, again, there's a bit.ly link that you can pick up. When you get a copy of your email, you'll have a link to the presentation. You'll be able to pick these yellow bands out and be able to check them out for us. Can veterans access treatment with cannabis through the VA? Manny, this is right in your wheelhouse.
It is. I want to start off with a hard no. You cannot get treatment for with cannabis through the VA. However, they can discuss it with you. They
Mm-hmm.
can't recommend it. They can't prescribe it other than just having a discussion with you. There is no other way to obtain medical marijuana instead of out of pocket or self-pay expense.
Sure.
However, the VA, you will not lose benefits from the VA, regardless of what your benefits are, as long as you're in a legal state that has a medical marijuana program and you do it appropriately. Um, and it is encouraged to speak with your VA physicians. If you do run into issues with that, always consult with your VA liaison and keep on pushing. Seek advocacy, if you will, through the Grateful Veterans. I like to plug them a lot. I'm wearing their shirt. Or you could reach me at thebluntjoint.life to help guide you through that process. And I'm by no means a legal professional or a lawyer. However, I do know the jargon. I do have certain relationships where we can have a discussion, and that's what we do at the Blunt Joint, is provide those discussions.
So yeah, veterans, it's very, very important. Next question is, why does it matter what cannabis is a Schedule 1? It's legal in my state. Why should that affect gun ownership? Why does it matter if your cannabis is Schedule 1? I think it's basically because a Schedule 1 drug means it has no value at all and it's federally illegal.
Absolutely. That also keeps it from interstate commerce, from crossing state lines. There is, and I don't know it off the top of my head, where there is a federal policy that controls interstate travel with your weapon. And even though you have state programs that allows you concealed carry and otherwise, having a medicinal product that the federal government considers a Schedule 1 narcotic with no medicinal benefits can really hem you up if you're doing the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong place, or even doing the right thing in the wrong time in the wrong place. So you want to be very cautious. And basically what this is going to suggest is that even though you're in a state that's legal, like Florida, you can carry. Just like anything else, you don't want to be under the influence of any narcotic or prescription drug the same way if you were carrying your concealed weapon, that if you were under the influence of marijuana and carrying your concealed weapon,
Yeah.
or carrying at all, open carry, depending on the state. I am a concealed carry license holder, and I haven't carried my weapon, and I can't even remember how long, simply because I'm using medical marijuana daily, and I don't want to be caught up in that instance until it is legally, or excuse me, federally changed on a legal level.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in that it is legal, but on the other side of the coin, you really don't want to poke the bear because on a federal level, things are changing so much. You just don't know. Don't poke the bear unless you have to. Put it that way. But I do
And I
know
would
that you can own a gun and be a medical marijuana user.
Yes, absolutely. I was just going to say you could have both. You just don't want to carry both at the same time.
Right.
And you just want to be precautious because when you're filling out that federal form trying to purchase a weapon, there is a specific question to that. And the caveat is, the warning is that because the federal government doesn't recognize medical marijuana, hence medical, as a medicinal, it's federally illegal.
Right.
Therefore, it's not a HIPAA violation per se, because it's not asking you any medical questions, because
Right.
they don't consider it medical whatsoever. Once that changes, then it'll be a lot different.
So guns and medical marijuana licenses are good. Here's the problem. If you go to buy a new gun, what happens?
You maybe and more than likely will be denied. However, just like there's loopholes for everything, there's a loophole for this. If you go to purchase a weapon legally, where there is no federal questionnaire required, like gun shows or gun shows, then you're perfectly fine and within your rights to do so. Personally, usually my brother, for me, he usually buys a whole bunch of guns. He'll get tired of one, and then I'll legally purchase it from him and register it after the purchase. So there's ways around this legally. Just be cautious. You don't want to get caught up lying on a federal form.
Sure. No question about it. Where do I start when it comes to routes of administration? And by the way, there are a number of routes of administration. There's tincture drops, sprays, capsules, edible, topicals, patches, vaporizers, flower, concentrates. Really, the route of administration depends on what you're comfortable with. For example, are you comfortable smoking or vaping? Are you comfortable with edibles? Are you comfortable with vaping? Concentrates, for example, require a little bit of work. Really, Manny, tell me a little bit about this, because each of these has a different onset, has a different duration effect. And really, the ease of titration is really the key that you really want to address the issue that you have and what you're comfortable with. Is that safe to say?
You're absolutely correct. And however, this sounds kind of contradictory here, but most consultants normally will advise you to try an inhalant or a vape, if you will, first. simply because it's fast in and it's fast out. So if you don't like the effects of that particular product after you inhale it, it
Right.
won't last as long, and that uncomfortable feeling won't deter you from using cannabis again. That
Sure.
being said, being that there's more research now and more practice, at least on my part working with patients,
Mhm.
I've seen that you can start with edibles and you can have a safety net by having a high concentrate CBD product from the dispensary to kind of offset any, if you will, side effects that may contribute to an uncomfortable feeling. So if you were to take too much of a cookie or a chocolate bar or too much of a sublingual tincture and you were feeling very, very uncomfortable and you couldn't snap out of it within, I would say, 5 to 10 minutes, using a high concentrate CBD product, let's say a ratio of 20 to 1, 20 parts CBD, 1 part THC in a sublingual edible or vape, will help bring that effect or that feeling down, and that
Mhm.
euphoric effect, more importantly, down to where it's at a comfortable level. But as
Mhm.
you suggested, Mark, you have oral, sublingual, topical, edible, inhalation, and then a smokable route. The
Right.
difference between inhalation and smokable is everything that's flower. Inhalation is anything that you can inhale that's not flower. Again, remember, if you go into a dispensary particularly and you get a consultation, 9 times out of 10, they'll probably recommend a vape or some type of inhalant unless you're dealing with
Mhm.
lung cancer or you completely don't want to inhale anything, which they won't fight you on. As soon as you say, I don't want to inhale anything, they'll try to deter to something else, probably a sublingual. The key is to always start low and go slow.
Right.
Titrate yourself up, particularly if you're ingesting it, because as soon as you think it should be kicking in and it's not, and you take another dose, that's when it's going to come back and smack you in the back of the head
Mhm.
and say, hey, you shouldn't have taken that dose yet. Now you've taken too much, but always have that CBD as a safety net.
But I think the important thing to point out is each of these has a different onset time. Like, for example, you mentioned flower and vaporizers. They work almost immediately. Same thing with topicals. Or if you take something like edibles, edibles say they take 30 minutes to work, but some of them can take 2 to 3 hours, which is really important because there are people that'll take an edible, and if it doesn't work after about 30 minutes to an hour, will take another one. And then 2 hours later, they both kick in. And that's something to be very careful of. And by the way, I should mention, here's a link to a whole series of webinars that'll talk and take each of these routes of administration and take them in depth. And I think you should, if you're interested in cannabis or interested in any particular type of route of administration, please check that video out. It'll help you quite a bit. One very interesting question is it safe to combine routes of administration to more specifically target different areas and conditions? And I'm going to start by saying I do. The answer is yes, and I do. For example, I have herniated discs in my neck. I have 7 of them. I'm really managing inflammation and pain. So what I do in the morning when I first get up is I take a couple of hits off of a vape pen, because a vape pen will work within 2 to 5 minutes, and I'll take my pain level from a 7 or an 8 down to a 1. And then I'll take some tincture drops, which will last between 4 to 6 hours to really carry me through the morning and into the afternoon. And that's an example of mixing and matching routes of administration. The key is to have the terpene profile in both of those products that match your particular condition. Thoughts on that, Manny?
I couldn't have said it better. The only other example I could give you is using a topical while using an ingestible or an inhalant,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if you're dealing with like rheumatoid arthritis or any kind of joint pain or muscle ache, stuff like that. You can use a topical, which doesn't break the water table or gets into the bloodstream. Therefore, there's no euphoric effect. You just get the effect where you applied that topical.
Good point.
However, as you suggested, Mark, you could take an inhalant and then a sublingual or edible after, because by the time the inhalant's wearing off, that sublingual or edible should be kind of kicking in and give you that nice homeostasis biphasic effect where you're
Sure.
balanced out. One particular example that I like to use is sleeping. If you having trouble going to sleep, you might want to use an inhalant. If you have trouble staying asleep, you might want to use an edible or a sublingual or something that's going to be ingested so it lasts longer to help you stay asleep. And that's why consultations are so important.
Right. And edibles last between anywhere between 6 to 10 hours, meaning it should carry you through the night. Or if you use a tincture drop or you use a vape, it'll only last between 2 to 4 to maybe 6 hours. You'll wake up in the middle of the night, and which is what you don't want to do. You want to keep yourself and have a good restful night's sleep.
Absolutely.
Great question here. What are the right temperature for my vape, and does this matter? And the answer is it absolutely matters. Cannabis terpenes and cannabinoids are very, very, very sensitive to temperature. That's why when people when people come to me and say, well, I'm just going to smoke a joint and I'll get my medical cannabis, the answer is that's not really going to help you, because at 550-degree temperature, that flame that you use to light that joint will burn off half of the cannabinoids, almost all the terpenes, and almost all the flavonoids. So blunts or joints will work. You just got to use more of them to get the same effect that you would use if you're using a tincture drop or an edible or a capsule or something like that. That being said, you can actually bring out the best in this cannabis product by being able to set the temperature of your vape pen or the temperature of your dryer vaporizer to each of these different temperatures. Tell me a little bit about that, Manny, because I know in my particular case, I'm trying to fight inflammation and pain. I set my dryer vaporizer to 356 degrees.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Most of the time when you're dealing with temperatures, you're dealing with dabs, but I want to bring attention to vape batteries, vape cartridge batteries, pod batteries. Most of them will have 3 settings, a low, medium, and high. And most of them are according to the temperatures you see on the screen now. My personal regimen would be to use in the daytime at a low to medium heat, a sativa category product, more uplifting, more energizing, more cerebral than body. And I use it at low or medium heat because it doesn't release as much terpenes or cannabinoids or it doesn't reach that boiling point, if you will. So it's not as heavy or as euphoric or whatever the effect I'm looking for. As the day progresses on that same product, I would raise the heat to medium to high to get a more significant effect. Then in the afternoons, I would switch it off to maybe a different hybrid or indica category product, more even keeled to relaxing, if not sedative, at a medium to high heat to hit those higher terpenes. And what I mentioned before about dabs, that's at a super high heat, above 400 degrees. And the reason most people will use dabs is for a very significant effect. However, it's not so much the terpenes and THC delta 9 that they're going after. It's THCV that's evaporated at or the boiling point at that point, and it gives you a much more euphoric, intense effect. However, it's shorter lived and it actually defeats the purpose of delta 9. So by doing so, you have to be cautious because you could really raise your tolerance level to a point where only dabs will work unless you take a holiday or what we call a tolerance break for 3 days, 3 to 7 days.
That's a good point. So yeah, temperature does matter. And again, this is where I recommend using dryer vaporizers or vape pens that have temperature settings on them, as Manny mentioned, high, medium, and low, to really let you dial in the terpene profile. Next question. Let's run to see what we have here. Isn't all smoking bad for your health? Well, it's interesting. In the non-medical cannabis world, in our regular world, we have inhalers, especially for people who have asthma and that type of thing. You've had things that you put into your lungs that are good for you. And candidly, cannabis is good for your lungs, but in a vape format, meaning a steam format, not burnt material, which brings in the carcinogens. Your thoughts about that, Manny?
I agree. It all depends on what you're using. There was a time, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, where people were purchasing their own vape cartridges online, and then they would go and purchase a syringe of concentrate, the same thing they fill at the dispensaries, their cartridges with, and using these third-party cartridges to fill up with vape and then vape them. Some of them are very reliable and trustworthy, but you also want to be cautious because you don't know what materials they were using, what their temperature range is, if you're burning off any heavy metals or mycotoxins from that materials they use. So everything is kind of regimented in the state program in Florida. I'm really, really impressed by the state program they have here. As limited to the consumer as it may be, it really does protect everybody in the sense of what it's meant for. And you can also vape flower. There's devices that are out there that you can put dry flower into, and you can raise the temperature on it to vape it instead of burning it and getting those carcinogens of whatever you're wrapping your flower in, whether it's blunt wraps, hemp paper, or bleach paper, or wherever your source may be. So there's a risk there no matter what you're inhaling, but the risk is mitigated significantly when you're going through a dispensary that has certificates of analysis and shows their product from the very seedling, from when they had the seed all the way to your hands as the consumer.
Sure. I think anytime you put anything into your lungs, you got to be careful because it's your lungs. But on the other side of the coin, we know things like these atomizers that they use for asthma. We know that some vaping, the vape pen set at the right temperature, really reduce the amount of liability that you have significantly. And that's why, as you mentioned, vaping is the way to go. I'm not much into promoting smoking, again, because that burnt material is not really good for your lungs. And again, there's a webinar down below on a particular subject we should be able to follow. What terpenes and routes of administration should I use with no to treat insomnia and poor sleep? This is a perfect example of matching the terpenes to the condition and of course, using a route of administration that makes sense. Manny, how would you put that all together for a patient?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this is a great chart. I love it. For me, it explains it in a very simplistic way. However, to the untrained user, it may be a little daunting. And I always tell people it depends on your modality of what you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable with vaping and you're having trouble falling asleep, using a vape heavy in myrcene, which will make it an indica category, or in the couch is how people remember it. It'll probably be paired with a little bit of linalool, and then it'll have some other subterpenes in there as well. Those are great to help go to sleep and or stay asleep. Again, depending on the modality. If you're having trouble both staying, or excuse me, going to sleep and staying asleep, you could use a vape pen to actually start getting your mind set to start falling asleep. Within about 5-10 minutes, you might start feeling groggy. Just make sure you take that gummy, sublingual, or whatever ingestible before you fall asleep, so you can stay asleep. And then the last caveat on that, despite the terpenes, linalool and myrcene, my favorite, terpenoline works really good as long as it's not high THC. But if you're using edibles, please, please, please use the partitions that the dispenser already put there, unless they tell you that it's homogenized and balanced through. What that means is if you break off a partition of a chocolate, which is probably going to be about 5 to 10 milligrams, and then you cut that partition in half, you don't know which has all the medicine. That means it's not homogenized. That's why they have it partitioned the way it is, usually 5 or 10 milligram increments. There is a couple of products, or excuse me, there are a couple of products out there that are homogenized that you can cut in halves or in quarters in order to get that effect that you're looking for. Remember, start low, go slow.
Right. And then, of course, match that to the onset effect and the duration that you're going to be looking for to really help you really at the time of day and what you want to accomplish, whether you're going to sleep at night or going to work or getting up. Let's run to the next question and see what we have here. How do I know what terpenes to use? This is a great chart that we've put out. On the left, we have the different symptoms and effect. And then on the right, we have all the different terpenes. This is something that you use in the dispensaries, isn't that right?
It very much is. And the first question that most consultants will ask you, or advisors will ask you, is what category, if you know, would you like to be in? And most people will either say indica, sativa, or hybrid. But that is just like saying red wine, white wine, and rosé. You still have bitter, sweet, fruity, so forth and so on. So when you get us the category, or if you tell us I need help sleeping or I need something help during the day, that'll help us tell us, or that'll help tell us which category you want to be in. And then we would guide from there which terpene profiles, whether it be sleep and pain, sleep and stress, if it's morning and agitation, or sleep and pain, daytime pain, whatever flow chart you may have as a personal symptom chart that you're dealing with, that's what the consultant is going to work with and point them out. So depending on what your symptom is going to determine the recipe of the terpene that are going to be available. If I had to point out any particular ones, myrcene is usually primary if you're looking for something for nighttime.
Yeah, that's one in the orange, and caryophyllene is one to the right of it. Yeah.
Yep. And then B-caryophyllene is usually primary if it's a hybrid. And then limonene is usually primary if it's a sativa or a uplifting product. Then everything falls in line behind that. So for instance, nighttime symptoms, myrcene, caryophyllene, and then any one of those other terpenes would be beneficial. Daytime pain, limonene, caryophyllene, maybe a little linalool to help relax the muscles, and then any other ones after that. If you're looking for straight pain relief during the day or midday, caryophyllene would usually be first. Limonene probably be second, and then follow with some other ones depending on the mood that you want to be in. And all of that can be found on a certificate of analysis. If you ask them, usually they'll list the top 3 or 4 to just get by. And if you want to dive deeper, ask for the COA.
Okay, great. Yeah. And almost all dispensaries have this kind of a chart. I remember when I first started using medical cannabis, went into a dispensary and described what I wanted, saw a lot of products, almost daunting the number of products that they had behind them on the counter. And they knew exactly which product to pick because they were able to look at this particular chart, know which products made sense, and recommend for me what's there. This is where getting a consultation and working with your dispensary really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it'll be a lot easier. Learn your categories. I know they're very generalized, sativa, indica, and hybrid, because if you know your categories, then the prominent terpenes will be in there. Again,
Sure.
sativa, limonene, indica, myrcene, hybrid,
Mhm.
caryophyllene.
Let's run to the next question, see what we have here. What can I take for anxiety and stress? This is a great question because there's a lot of people, especially in today's environment, that anxiety and stress is really the, let's just say, the order of the day. This is where, again, Manny, coming into getting the right terpene profile makes a lot of sense.
It really does. And that consultation is very important because I found with a lot of the consumers or patients that I work with that stress, anxiety, sleep, depression, all these go hand in hand. And it all depends on which one comes first. Lack of sleep can cause stress and anxiety. Stress and anxiety can cause lack of sleep. So having these personal discussions are very, very important. That being said, I would always advise trying to use a high CBD product first,
Hmm.
something like a 1-to-1 ratio. So 50% CBD,
Hmm.
50% THC, because that high euphoric effect from a high THC product can actually make one panic. And if you do, it can deter you from ever trying to use more product. But a one
Sure.
to one, most people compare it to maybe a couple of glasses of wine, a shot or two of whatever your favorite whiskey, or excuse me, liquor is. Mine is whiskey. So it all
Sure.
depends. Now, if you're looking for specific terpenes, limonene is fabulous during the daytime, but
Hmm.
with very little or no alpha pinene. Again, the two of them combined, especially in high levels meaning 1 to 2% together, can actually induce that stress or anxiety.
Sure.
If you're looking something more in the afternoon,
Hmm.
caryophyllene with some linalool. If it's the evening time, like you really want it to help you go to sleep, myrcene with linalool will do that as well.
Hmm. Good. Yeah, and this is very important. Cannabis works for anxiety and stress if you have the right terpene profile. I think it's very safe to say that it's one of the best reliefs you can get, especially for stress and anxiety. But again, make sure that COAs have the products that you need, the terpenes you need to address this particular condition. Manny, let's jump to the next slide and let's talk a little bit about before you go to sleep. Like somebody here, the question is, I've tried cannabis for sleep before, but it's not working. The question is, why? Why hasn't it? And there's a lot of good reasons as to why. I mean, one of the things I see is that people are using a cannabis product with the wrong terpene profile. But what are some of the other reasons why it won't work?
So typically, if you had just started and you found a product, and I've run into this so many times, the patient or the consumer comes back and says, "Man, that was amazing the first few days to a week, and now it's just not doing the same thing anymore. Why is that happening, Manny?" 9 times out of 10 is because your body has acclimated to that product.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, what I would suggest is finding something similar in a terpene profile
Right.
and kind of seesawing back and forth between the two to keep the body guessing. The
Mm-hmm.
body is very resilient that way. Another idea is to up your dosage ever so slightly, depending on what you're using. If it's sleep, usually it's a sublingual, edible, or some type of ingestible.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a sublingual, increasing it by a quarter dose, usually about 0.25, depending on the dropper or where you're shopping at, can
Right.
make that difference. Adding something like a small snack or something beforehand
Mm-hmm.
may assist with that as well. But typically it's the dosage or the chemovar, as also known as strain that you're using, and the
Mm-hmm.
body getting acclimated to it. So we just got to keep the body guessing a little bit.
It will work. In fact, the nice part about cannabis, especially if you're using an edible, is that it'll last between 6 to 10 hours. You will get a whole night's sleep as opposed to a tincture drop or a topical, or even getting a hit off a joint because that's only going to work for 4 hours or less. So I think that's really really important.
One other
Jump.
thing I found, Mark, if I may,
Yeah.
is I like the way Dr. Holt emphasizes on the outside things that are in our life that kind of distract us. And another thing that I found working with consumers is that once they find a regimen that works for them, usually right at the beginning, and like again, wow, this worked great for the first few days to a week, their livelihood changed a little bit during that week.
Sure.
They were up earlier, they're doing things differently. And now, because of their methods changing, they also have to adapt the dosage to that. So,
Yeah.
again, get that consultation, reach out to us, or take your time, go low, start low, go slow, and you'll be able to figure it out as well.
Right. And again, we have then in the yellow at the bottom, you'll see that there's a link to a sleeping with cannabis webinar that's really, really out there. Let's run to the next slide. What is Rick Simpson oil? RSO is just great. And is it made with hemp? But RSO came out many years ago. I'll let you talk about a little bit about it and give some history, Manny. But RSO is, I consider it the 151 Bacardi of cannabis. It's one of the most strongest forms of it because it has all of the terpenes in it. It's a whole plant product. So you're taking the whole plant. They're not subtracting anything from it, and you're using that in the cannabis process. It's very, very effective, but also it's something that you got to be careful of using. For example, you really don't want to smoke it. It's more of a topical and something that you are used as an edible. Your thoughts, Manny?
You're absolutely correct. Some dispensaries will call it FSO, full spectrum oil.
Mm-hmm.
It is the whole plant, and some of them at the very beginning they would come out very, very dark, very black, non-translucent.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you're starting to see more RSO oils come in these blunt joint or blunt tip syringes that are very translucent and golden, almost
Yeah.
like oils that are used in vapes. I still say don't inhale it. It can induce
Yes.
inflammation of the lungs because
Yeah.
of all the components of the plant being in there. I'm not going to get too
Right.
scientific on that, but it was mainly used primarily for cancer, orally, edibly, and topically.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's gone on to pain, anxiety, stress, and so forth. But again, to your warning there, Mark, it is very, very potent. A drop about the size of a grain of rice, or even a long grain rice, not the short grain rice, but a drop about the size of a grain of rice will go a very long way.
Yeah.
And what I used to do when I did use it was put it on a little dum dum lollipop because some of them
Mm-hmm.
can taste pretty earthy. I would suck on the lollipop. By the time I was done with the lollipop, I started feeling the effects, and it would last probably 7 to 8 hours depending.
Yeah.
So start low, go slow, get that consultation. Do not inhale it unless the dispensary specifies that it can be inhaled. But as far as I know right now, that is not the case in any subject for RSO or FSO.
Sure. And by the way, I should point out the RSO versus FSO, it's the same product, it's the same formula. The only difference is with RSO, the agent that he used, the base level agent he used, which was available 25, 30 years ago, is different today. They're using a more healthier base level, and that's where you find it more translucent than being black and thick because they're using basically a product that's a lot healthier for you today. That's where the FSO fits
Correct.
there. But I do want to point out a couple of things. One of the most important things is that next quarter, what we're looking at doing is we're looking at going into a lot of the different conditions. On the 9th of April, we're going to be looking at doing a webinar on sleep, and then we're going to talk about pain relief, managing neuropathy, navigating PTS, arthritis. We're talking about the power of cannabinoids, how to personalize your treatment, and then June 4th is going to be a very interesting one. That particular one is going to be on cannabis use disorder. And that's first time we've ever done this particular webinar. There's been a lot of discussions about it. And I think it's something that we're going to dig down into that particular topic. So please join us next quarter. But in the meantime, Manny, tell us a little bit about what you do in the blunt joint because you help a lot of people.
Absolutely. So just a little bit of background. And I've been mentioning I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a legal professional. I am a retired Army veteran who used to kick people out of the service for using not just marijuana, but other medications, if you will, or illicit drugs that weren't supposed to be used while on active duty. And I mentioned that because of the training I received there compared to the training, self-education, and other seminars, webinars, and so forth that I've gone through. I've learned differently, and I'm trying to give that back, not just to the veterans, but to the general public.
Sure.
One thing that had really got me swayed to doing this is I started working out after retirement just to have something to do at a dispensary, and probably 70, 80-year-old woman came walking in, very anxious, didn't want to be out in open, did a private consultation. And long story short, after about 6 months of working with her, she no longer had her walker. She would take off her shades when she walked through the door, swinging her scarf around or her shirt or her jacket around, and just had a much, much better quality of life. Because of that, and because of the experience and the way I've been able to relay it to people, or so I've been told, I decided to actually jump in and provide these discussions, not just to persons out on the street, but local police departments, sheriff departments, dispensary associates, you name it, anywhere I can go to actually provide information for better understanding so people can make a more informed decision about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and with what products they're doing it with, has made things a lot easier for people. And that has brought joy, not just for me, but for their family members and my family members as well, because my wife even got involved working with a medical marijuana clinic to help people. All services right now are completely free. We do take contributions or donations as we're transitioning into a nonprofit, and you can find all the information publicly, but we kind of consolidated at the blunt joint so it's more specific, and you can always reach us through the blunt joint in order to get that information.
Sure. Great. And Manny, again, this is your email address. It's here. There's your website, and you're available for consultation. I think anytime you can find people that are knowledgeable, that have been certified and knowledgeable in this area, and you can work with them, I think I highly recommend that. There's a lot of people out there that tell you about they know medical cannabis, but they don't. You've gone through a lot of training and a lot of scar tissue to get to where you're at today. So,
Oh
Manny,
yeah,
thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining me. I do want to point out, Julie and Ann asked the question of where you can find information after this particular webinar. And I do want to point out, you'll get an email from us that'll have a link to the video of this webinar. It'll have a link to a flip book, which is the presentation itself, so you can look at that. And then any other slides that we use, like the charts and things that we use, will be in that email. I also want to point out that if you go to YouTube, Marijuana Aware, this video will be posted probably by tomorrow night. And also the videos that we've done in the past, all of them are there. And they're broken down into how to get started, what are the basics, what are the various conditions that we address. We actually have separated out the questions and answers because a lot of people like to follow these Q&A periods. So we've done what we can to try to package it so that it's easy for you to understand. Manny, I want to thank you very much for helping me and for the last quarter, and more importantly, for joining me next quarter. Any final thoughts?
I always like to say thank you, of course, Mark, for having me. I always appreciate the time I get in front of viewers, especially even after the fact that these things kind of blow up afterwards. I always review on YouTube to see what other information we could provide. And again, thank you everybody for participating, and I hope to educate more in the future.
So thank you everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for watching us the last quarter, and please join us on April 9th. Manny and I will be waiting for you.